Welcome to Cold Coffee Chats, the podcast where we dive into the beautiful chaos of motherhood, the ups and downs of marriage, and the journey of growing our faith. I'm Brittany.
I'm Aubrey.
And we're your host. Each week, we'll gather around the table, coffee cups in hand, to share stories, insights, and a good dose of laughter. Whether you're navigating the sleepless nights of new parenthood, balancing the demands of family life, or seeking deeper connections in your marriage and spiritual journey, this is the space for you. Together, we'll explore the real, the raw, and the relatable moments that shape our lives. So go find that cup of now cold coffee that you probably laid down somewhere, get comfy, and let's chat about the beautiful mess of life. We have a super special guest on today's episode of Cold Coffee Chats.
While we are typically talking to moms, today we have our dad here.
He goes by David, Dave, Clark, DG, but his favorite title is probably DD.
He is dad to 3, me being his favorite, and DD to 9 grandkids with a 10th arriving next month.
He's been married to our mom for over 42 years.
And we can't wait for you to hear his story and get to know his heart a little in today's episode.
So let's get to it. All right, tell us about growing up and what your childhood was like. We're starting at the beginning today.
At the very beginning?
Well, maybe just like some main points that made you
We don't
who
have
you
that
are.
long.
Are we on the air right now?
Yeah.
Okay. Well,
Maybe main points that made you like who you are.
well, so I come from a family of 4 kids. So I have 2 older sisters and a younger brother. Mm-hmm. So the first 3 of us, my 2 older sisters and I, are very close in age. So we were all, 1 grade apart. So junior high school.
Bonnie was busy.
She was busy. So my mother came from Mount Jackson, Virginia. She, grew up in very humble beginnings. She was born in an apple shed packing house that was, all, on a dirt road, little building. My grandfather I never met, worked for the orchard. So she came from, she knew what it was like to just have a potato on the table to eat, or maybe to go eating without meals. My grandmother raised 5 kids after my mother's father passed away at a very early age. He was 40 and she was 10. And why that's kind of important is she comes to Winchester for beauty school, meets my dad, who's just moved here recently from New Orleans, and is heading up the gum service station with my grandfather. And so she runs into him, and anyway, and of course they get married, and they have 4 children, 3 in a row, and 1 5 years later. And then they moved here because my grandfather was ill, and he worked for the New Orleans Shipbuilding Company. He was a chief auditor, so kind of CFO today title back then, and very successful in that. But he came here to open a country store and run it and give the family a source of income if anything happened to him. And so, as it turns out, he lives to be near 94. My dad passes away at 40, and I'm 10 years old.
That's really crazy. I don't think I knew that.
Yeah.
I didn't
I knew you were
the same
10.
ages.
Yeah, I didn't know that.
For grandma too.
So my grandmother Harris, who lived in Mount Jackson, lived up on the mountain, in a little house they paid $425 for, back in the, I guess it was the 40s, 30s. And she, and so, I spent a lot of time with her. She was a big influence in my life. And it was just great to go up there and be around her. But one of the things they always said, and like if somebody didn't know how to change a tire, or someone wasn't good at, what they considered manly things, they would say something about that. And so when my dad passed away, all I could think about was, oh my gosh, who's going to teach me how to be a man? Who's going to teach me how to change a flat tire, or whatever, turn wrenches? And so, because my dad was a mechanic and, worked on cars and had his own business, and he worked 7 days a week in that business. He worked for Crown Court and Seal once his kids came along because he needed some of the benefits and a more steady income. So he worked Crown Court and Seal then during the day and worked his business at night and on the weekends.
Was that about the same time that Mom mom's dad was working there, or no? Like, did they know each other?
No. Yeah, my mom's. Oh yes. You mean I get a little confused.
My mom.
Yes,
Your wife.
Miss Page, the queen. Yes. So my dad and Paige's dad worked together,
Okay.
but I didn't know that at the time. But what's very interesting, so you know, I'll jump ahead a little bit. But years later, of course, I well, I run into Paige, and knew her in school. Her mother said she had a crush on me since the 7th grade, but she won't admit to that. We didn't really start dating until after high school. But we went to school together. I knew her, she knew me. We went to Lord Fairfax together. You know, she got stuck in a snowstorm one time. I gave her a ride home. Anyway, and I
Played the long game.
paid the long, yeah. But anyway, so later, her when I first dated Paige, probably about the second date, her dad said, "Hey, I want to show you something." And he took me down the basement. I thought, man, I'm gonna get a whooping or something, or this is going to be the "Don't touch my daughter" speech or something,
Yeah.
But instead, it was, he had made his basement a rec room, and there was a bar in the one corner, and there was this refrigerator, and you have to know Paige's dad, y'all's grandfather, that orange was his favorite color. I mean, he went so far as to have an orange truck, which is kind of crazy, but orange was his favorite color. And there was a refrigerator down there that was painted orange, and he said, "Your dad painted that for me." So that was kind of cool. Yeah. And then it was, I didn't, maybe years later, after Paige and I were married and had 2 kids, I was going through some stuff, and actually Stuart Ellis, one of the pallbearers to my dad's funeral. So it's kind of
Really?
crazy.
Oh,
Yeah, and he's listed.
He didn't mention that?
No, he didn't. And I knew they knew each other. Obviously,
Yeah.
they were friends. But his name's actually in the as one of the pallbearers.
That's really great.
It's where it's kind of cool.
Yeah.
And so anyway, so there was this there was things going on that neither one of us knew, of course. But I was fortunate in that after my dad passed away, my mother did remarry. And their marriage was a struggle our entire childhood. So certainly know a lot of lessons from that. But he certainly loved us kids and did the most for us. He made sure we all had a vehicle. He made sure we had more motorcycles to ride with the rest of the kids, and we learned how to water ski and do water sports because of him, and we really learned how to work. I mean, he was a workaholic, a lot like my dad, 7 days a week, and he expected us to work equally as hard. There was never a day off from school. There was never a spring vacation. All those were, "Hey, Clark, come to work." So snow days or anything else. So he taught me. I learned all those skills from him. He's a mechanical contractor. So we
Did Garland take Sundays for church, or
No. My dad was like that too. He insisted we go to church. I mean, that was mandatory that us kids went to church. And later in the years when he was sick, I can remember my mom dropping us off and then going back to help with him, and not always. Maybe my little brother would come along because he would have been 5, pretty young yet. So, but us 3 definitely were, I won't say forced, to church. We were, and a lot of times my mother was there. But when my dad, later on in years when my dad was sick, and that's kind of what sticks in my memory the most. When he was sick, she'd drop us off at Round Hill Methodist, and the Gums went to the Presbyterian church downtown. And he said that church was a little too uppity up for us. We need to go to the Methodist church. So my aunts went to the Presbyterian church, and that was always their church, and considered the Gums church. But my dad, insisted we go to the Methodist church instead. So it was Round Hill Methodist, and we lived in Round Hill, so it was close.
So you were 10 when your dad died. How old were you when Grandma married Garland?
Oh, it was right after my accident. So, so I got hit by a car when I was 12, and so it was right after that.
Do you want to talk about getting hit by a car or accident? How that
Well,
shaped you? How that
it did shape me a little bit. So we always saw my dad and Garland, very strong men. You would never see them tear up or be emotional about anything. For the most part, they were they both served in their country in wartime, and and so they were strong men. But when I get hit by the car, and the reason maybe I got a little emotional about that is because I remember my sister telling me that girl and cry.
Oh, wow. You didn't know you were coming to therapy today.
No. But anyway, so the car was getting hit by the car was interesting because it shaped my life for maybe the next 10 or so years, and so getting hit by a car and having a head injury, is not exciting, and so I was on Delanton up until I was about 24, and
For those that don't know, what is that?
that's keeping from having seizures.
Okay.
So I basically, had pressure on my brain, so when I got hit 45 miles an hour.
Well, yeah. So you got hit. You were walking. You were a pedestrian.
I was pedestrian walking across Route 50, where Round Hill Rueton Club is today. Mm-hmm. So if that highway's it's certainly busy today. It was busy back then, but not as busy as today, but it was busy. And there was this lady coming home from seeing her husband. He was the principal, I think, of Caton Bridge School, and she was a teacher. And they were married, and he had a heart attack. So she was at Winchester Hospital, which at that time was downtown Winchester, where what we call the old hospital today, or Blue Ridge Hospice is today. And anyway, so that's where the hospital was. And she was coming home. I didn't see her, and there really was nothing I think that she could do to avoid hitting me. I for the longest time I didn't remember anything about the accident. I barely remembered my family and people's names and all that stuff. So it took a long time to get my memory back. But eventually, maybe 4 years, 5 years later, I can remember turning around and seeing the headlights, and that's it. And so anyway, it took me from the far extreme lane on one side to the far extreme lane on the other side. What's interesting, I wore glasses back then. The very next day, my mom and they went back to see if they could find my glasses, and there they were laying in the gravel right off the road. So it was chipped a tooth, swelling of the brain. They relieved the pressure, told my mother to go home. It was, it was 50-50 chance and all that good stuff. So I sat in ICU for a while.
Did you break any bones?
That's what's really amazing. I mean, so they debated for a long time whether to put a cast on my left arm or not. But I think I was in the hospital so long they just decided to, they didn't need to do that. But I remember different doctors coming in debating what to do about my arm. But I was black and blue from my knees up. I mean, just black and blue. And when I got out of the hospital, I was on crutches and I couldn't walk. I had to regain my muscles because I was there so long. And you just lose all your strength. And so I remember falling down the steps when I first got home. I remember having a nosebleed that wouldn't stop, hemorrhaging and having to go back to the hospital. I remember those things. And, my mother would not take her eye off of me.
I'm sure.
Yeah.
I feel like this is the most detail, we're hearing, because, growing up, we knew that you got hit by a car, and, in our family, our immediate family, it was kind of not a joke, but we kind of give you a hard time about it. Yeah. But then one day, we brought it up, with your family there, and they all got very serious.
We made a joke about it because that's what we were used to doing, and
because Dad jokes about it.
Yeah, and then your entire family, almost we found out that some of them, our cousins didn't know about it because Aunt Kathy could not talk about it.
Yeah.
So Trisha learned about it that day. She was like, "What?" And they were crying, and we're like, "Oh."
Well, now I'm hearing you talk about it in such detail. I'm like, oh my gosh, no wonder now I feel terrible for talking about it all these years.
I remember we were at the lake and somehow it came up, and Patricia and all of them. So my siblings, children, they knew nothing about it. Nothing spoken about. We didn't really talk about it much. Yeah. It was, I guess, a tough time for the family. But Paige, remember, she was in school and we were in the 7th grade, so she remembers, she'll talk about it and say that, she remembers the teacher coming in and say, hey, David Gumbs hit last night. We're not sure, if he's going to make it or not, but, keep me in his prayers. And all of them, I can remember the whole school writing me letters. And up until I got married to Paige, I still had a bag full of all those letters and cards. And finally I said, okay, I'm married now, we can fix this. But yeah, I guess it was it's not a way to become a celebrity for sure, but obviously, not too many people get hit by a car, in our community, especially the size of the community at that time, and not be a big deal. So I guess it was. One of the really cool things was, when I came to, I remember knowing my mother, but that was about the extent of it. And so I happen to remember everybody's name, remember who people were, remember your alphabet, multiplication tables and all that stuff all over again, learn how to read. And still having some, memory blocks, that, like taking tests and things like that. I think I went out as a good student. People thought I just came back as a good student, but I was really a poor student. But I think, we just kind of pushed it under the rug and pushed me along. But when when it came time to get out of high school and then make a decision whether to go to college or not, there was just no way I could come up with that, So I just took my accounting classes. I was really good at numbers. Numbers was a thing that certainly stuck with me. But anything else was tough. But just reading and sticking to self-discipline to get through all that was really good. I started to say that one of the coolest things was I remember when I was at least better and could walk well and could handle myself well. We went to Caton Bridge's fire department yard party or something like that, and the teacher had been really wanting to actually physically see me, to make sure. I can't imagine. She's coming home from her husband having a heart attack, and she hits this kid. Destroyed her car. She couldn't drive the car home. You just imagine when you hit a deer at 45 miles an hour. Just imagine what happens when you hit a body. So anyway, but anyway, being able to be introduced to her, and I could just see her face light up. That.
I didn't know that. I didn't know that you got to meet her after.
Yeah.
Oh.
So can we go back a little? So I know when your dad passed, and because he didn't go to church, you kind of had a moment there where you asked God to have him pass on a Sunday. Can you kind of talk about the foundation of your faith, and then kind of like when you got hit by the car, how that's been tested?
You got me crying the whole time.
No, I'm so sorry.
That's what we do here.
It's important.
Yeah.
Though.
Well, my dad, was definitely a believer in God, and he insisted we go to church. And, in our last Christmas, so think back then, things weren't like they are today. There weren't the social programs and Social Security, leniency as it is today. But, we were poor. I mean, my dad was a hard worker. He worked at Crown. He ran his own business, and we had 3 homes, 2 being rented. We had the store and the garage that he was, had bought from my grandfather. So he was, we were making payments on that too. So imagine now you go without a job, and my dad was never sick, never sick. So I remember when he first got sick, or it's almost like, okay, he's got the flu or something, right? And so he goes to the VA center, and he finds out he has lung cancer. And so I just remember coming home from school one day and the house being full of people, and it's like, what the heck's going on? And I finally get a hold of my aunt. She takes me to a private area and tells me. And I don't know that it, back then the cancer was death, immediate death. There wasn't the treatments we have today. So it was doom and gloom. He went through several treatments, but it just seemed like they made him worse. And but he insisted we go. So our last Christmas, so my dad passes away on January 11th of 1971. So our last Christmas is 1970. Yeah, and a friend gave them $100. So we were getting the glass gallon jars full of coins from Crown Court and Seal or whoever was taking up money, and we would, as kids, we would help count that and roll it, and that's how we lived, a lot. And so we weren't, Christmas was obviously going to be extremely skim that year, as it had been the year before too. And Dad was diagnosed and lived about a year from that. So someone had given him $100, and so out of that $100, we all got a Bible. And so we all got the same Bible. That was important to him, that we have a Bible. And he left us a letter.
We can edit the pause.
Yeah, he left us a letter, basically saying to take care of each other, and help our mother. It's so. I don't think my mother would mind this, but there's when you have two sets of parents, there's usually one stronger than the other, and my dad was definitely the strong one. But my mother coped well, and she, she met several challenges. It just made her stronger. Maybe in some cases made her a little too tough. And she was, but she was in survival mode for most of our childbearing years. One time they rezoned the schools, where you went to school, and so we went to Round Hill Elementary School, which was 4 grades. The principal was the 4th grade teacher as well, and all the lunches came from Klein Elementary and were served in the basement, and came in a station wagon, and anyway. So we, but it wasn't considered the best school. Klein Elementary was the newer school. Now the Ferry County Administrative Building's there, but that was the best elementary school at the time. So when some of my friends got changed to go to Klein out around Hill, but I was still around Hill, my mother just takes me to Klein and drops me off one day and says, "There's where you're going to school." Anyway, and so I ended up in the principal's office, and they sit there trying to figure out why I'm there, and eventually, they got me back to Round Hill. But my mother was that type of person.
Where was Kathy and Susan at this point?
It only went to the 4th grade, so they were, and I was in the 4th grade at that time, so they were already at Klein, they were already at Klein.
She's like, I'm not going to 2 separate schools.
Right, she is, heck with what they say, she was a fighter. Yeah.
So when you were a kid, in your mind, what did your future look like, and how is that different to how it turned out? Like, what did you want for your future? How did you picture it, and how is that different from
how it is?
Yeah.
Wow, it's really different. So everyone always thinks you have to have these answers, right? You just think you always have to have the answers, and you have to have everything now and know where you're going tomorrow. And it just doesn't work that way. And God will just He will just throw you. I think He has a great sense of humor, and He'll throw you all kinds of curveballs. And He has a plan. You just don't know the plan. But you need to learn to put your faith in Him. So my plan was always that I would take over my stepfather's mechanical contracting business. And he ran about 4 crews. He was always busy. He was really had a great reputation. Even when we go through the Carter years when there wasn't any building going on, the interest rate was 24% or whatnot. He still had a lot. He still had all the business he wanted. His phone never stopped ringing. So if we weren't building new things, he still had tons of service calls. And anyway, he was a really good technician. His mind was really sharp. He could build anything. We took care of water plants, so the private water plants like Lakeside Estates or the Summit or a lot of these developments back in the day before the county took them over. Those, we managed those, or he did. And before they had these water leak detectors and everything, he built one so we could find out where the water leaks were and everything. And so he was just really good at that kind of stuff. And I really, I would say when I was in high school and, there would be a snow day and, 1 minute Q102 would say, "Hey, no school today for Ferry County Public Schools." And I, go, "Wow, that's good, no school." And then, about 10 minutes later, the back door would open because our shop was right next door. And Garland would say, "Clark, coming to work?" And so you also know that, my whole family calls me Clark. That's my middle name. My dad was David, so my mother didn't want me called Little Dave. So everybody calls me Clark, and which is, even today, sometimes the family will show up and say Clark, and everybody goes, "Who?" But anyway, he would say Clark, and of course, then I would get ready immediately and go bend conduit in the cold weather all day or something like that, because either putting insulation in, blowing insulation. When I was small, maybe 13 years old, right after the accident. I can remember going out every Saturday and feeding the insulation bag. They're 50 pounds a piece, and make $5 a day doing that all day. So he was he was a great worker, and I just saw myself following in his footsteps. I do remember one time you have those. I think when you're little, everyone has these, or young people have these conversations like, "Hey, what do you want to do when you grow up?" And I can remember one time that being a conversation at our table, dinner table or whatever, and my and I said, "Well, I want to be like you. I want to own my own business and be my own boss." I probably said that. Yeah, I'm pretty sure I said that, because then his response was, "Well, if you have your own business, you'll never be your own boss. You'll have hundreds of them." And that was interesting, and I use that still today, and it's absolutely true. People think it's glamorous and wonderful to be the CEO of a company or own a company, but it just means you're going to have a whole lot more people you're responsible for, and a whole lot more bosses, or people you have to respond to, report to, and answer for. So I really thought I would grow up in that business. My stepfather had a person that worked for him that was a very difficult person, and he was right down mean. And so I thought it would be, we had a difference of opinion, and he was really the supervisor. So I just thought, I need to go work someplace else for a couple of years, and I'll come back. And I'll gain experience someplace else. And my stepfather was he was great at working and doing things. He wasn't, I wouldn't always say he was always the greatest business person, meaning that, if you didn't pay him, you just didn't pay him. He never went after you for that kind of stuff. He had a heart. I tell you this story to tell you a little bit about who he was. Our phone rang all the time, and my mother was always in conflict with that phone ringing and never having any peace and having to work all the time. Anyway, so one night, our personal, we have two lines, the business line and the personal line. One night, our home phone number rings, and of course, my mother was going, "I don't take it that number." And but it was a friend of my stepfather's, Garland's, who knew him personally, and said, "Listen, there's this family, up in Mount Falls. That's all I can remember. It was up there someplace 608 or 600. I can't remember exactly. But they've got 4 kids, young kids, and they've got no heat. And it was cold. It was probably 20 degrees that night or so. And so we get out of bed, and we're already in bed at this time. And so we get out of bed, and he and I go, and we go up there. We get there, and it's a poor family. I mean, the kids are running around outside with hardly any clothes on. It's cold. I mean, I'm wrapped up. I can remember being wrapped up and being cold myself, and I'm got all the clothes in the world, and I'm cold. Anyway, and we can't get the furnace running, so we go back down all the way to the shop. It's probably about another 30 minutes back, and we get in one of his parts trailers, and we're throwing parts around, and finally we find the right part for the boiler he needs. And we go back up and put the boiler on. Well, then, of course, they didn't have any fuel either. So then we go back down and get diesel fuel and come back up and fill the tank up with about 15 gallons of diesel fuel, enough to get them through probably a couple of days. And the house, now we got the house, it's being warmed and the heat's on. And all the kids kind of go back inside, and the guy says, "What I owe you?" And Garland says, $5. But that's the kind of guy he was. So he had a big heart. He was hard on us kids. I mean, he expected a lot of us, but he treated his customers a whole lot better. But that's just the kind of guy he was, and people know him, today, even for his quality of work and the good guy that he was.
How do you feel like your relationship with him, and then, all the things that your mom went through and how she raised you guys has affected your parenting style with your own?
Well,
you can think of it.
I just need to be sensitive to my mother, who's, still living, and I, made a commitment this year because I got so busy in my life that I really, don't see my mother that much, and yet she lives right here in the same town. We lost Garland, 3 years ago. And so she's been kind of lonely since then. But anyway, I made a commitment. I was at the hospital with her, on the 911 calls, and I was at the hospital, and I realized, my gosh, only time I see Mom is a 911 call. So I made a commitment to pick her up at the hairdresser, because she was a hairdresser every Thursday, pick her up and take her to lunch every Thursday. And we do that, and I think we've only missed maybe, in a year now, close to almost celebrating a whole year of that now. Maybe we've missed 4 times because of business conflicts. But so a little sensitive to this, but my mother and stepfather really struggled as a couple. I think they always got back together, but I remember in high school a couple separation periods, and sometimes my stepfather moved out, sometimes my mother moved out. One time my mother went and bought a house in Woodstock and moved her and Mike up there, and we were left here, and it was just always a conflict, and you struggled. It was almost like you had to choose a side, and I also know that after somewhere between my accident, Mom had kidney operation in Charlottesville, so we actually thought at one point, oh my gosh, we could be parentless, and so during that time, Garland took care of us and everything else. So he was really a good dad. But they did struggle a lot. So so one thing I wanted to make sure of is that my priority, my kids would always be a priority. And so I think most of the time y'all say that you didn't hear us argue too much or yell too much at each other or have too many arguments or fights other than money. And that's because, Mom likes money. I mean, she likes
to spend it.
Yeah, I also say she's part of our success story because, it took a lot to feed her. No, I don't mean that. I don't mean that from a food standpoint. I just mean that, she's always wanted her kids.
She's gonna kill you.
I know, I'm dying for this. We
we
got to edit some of this out.
She did say the money was always for groceries. So
Yeah. She bought a ton of groceries, I'll tell you what. But money is something I've always been good at, and it's not what she's good at. But our family was always a business family. We ate at 4:00. The meal was served at 4:00, and you were there or you missed it. And you ate what was on the table, period. And we went to work, we ate it, we got in from work, especially during the summers when I worked every summer. And then we would eat at 4, and then we'd go back to the shop and make ductwork or, stuff for HVAC. Back then, now you can buy all that stuff already pre-made, but back then you couldn't. So you had your own machines to make the bin and glue the insulation on and all that stuff. And we would do that all night long, getting ready for the next job. So, anyway, but we were a business family. There were some emotional times, but we weren't like a loving, hugging family. It just those things were not something we did. So when I was assistant fire chief of Company 15 Round Hill. Really loved doing that. And one day at the fireman's parade, the Christmas parade, I'm in the officer's position, which is, so you have a driver and then an officer's position. I'm in that position, and I'm throwing out the candy to the little kids. And there's Paige with like 4 or 5 her little nieces, nephews, in hand on the curb. And I looked down there and I thought, wow, if that woman that's a good woman there. She can handle all them kids. That's what I want for a wife. And so I called her up like the next day and asked for a date. And I got that date. That wasn't bad. But then the second date was a little tougher to get.
Where'd y'all go? What'd you do on your first date?
Oh, I think Cool Font was our biggest thing. That was Berkeley Springs. And we go up to the Cool Font, which is now, I think, just now reopened. I haven't come back up there. But anyway, it's a little distance. But, I worked a good bit. Also went to Lord Fairfax, taking all my accounting classes. But, I could wine and dine her pretty good.
What is Cool Font?
Cool Font is like a restaurant.
Is it a restaurant?
Yeah,
oh, is it still open?
It closed for a long time, but now I understand it's back open.
I have a memory. We went as Mom and Dad took us, like one of their anniversaries. We were really little. And
y'all took us with us?
I was there. Maybe they didn't take you. But Mom ordered French onion soup, and she said I was going to love it. And I was like, it was not, I still have to this day not eaten it, but that's my only memory of Cool Font.
That's so funny.
Yeah, I mean, Garland loved it. They would go up there quite a bit. So, we were from the Round Hill end of the county. Of course, Mom was from the Stonewall end. And I remember when I first went to, so I started dating her and picking her up. I had a real cool truck. I had a cool Scout. That had the exhaust come out on the sides and had the loud mufflers and 4-barrel on the cam. Oh yeah, and when you take that thing down the road, it would light up both mirrors at night because the fire was light. Yeah, it was cool. But then also had like a nice truck. So I had the Ford XLT had just come out as a new model. Anyway, and I had that too. So I like nice things as well. But paid for them. Anyway, and I remember picking her up in that. And I remember Jimmy, her little brother, was like at the door going, wow. Because they had the chrome spoke wheels on and everything. And he said, wow, this guy's really cool. That was, I was introduced to a whole different family dynamics. It's just, not that our family didn't love each other and care for each other deeply, but Paige's family was definitely kissers and huggers and, it was like, they knew no strangers. And her mother, raised 6 kids, worked a job, and made homemade bread every Sunday. So, and had 35-some people in every Sunday, and there was no stranger. It was just a different environment, different thing, and so I learned a lot from them.
I think it was also a different time because, like today, if your family had gone through the trauma it had gone through, there might have been time and resources for Grandma to grieve and go through those things, and she didn't. She went through trauma after trauma and just had to keep supporting, and sometimes as a single mom. So I can't imagine.
Yeah, when anybody says anything, and sometimes kids can be critical of their upbringing and everything. So anytime we're talking about our upbringing, I will say to the family, I can't imagine. I can't. I think Mom did a great job because I can't imagine my mother or somebody going through everything she went through. So, one of the points is that when I was coming home from Boy Scouts when I got hit, and to just kind of tell you where her mind would have been. So her and Susan are coming down the road from we lived at Poorhouse Road. So when we lived at the Gum service station when my dad passed away, and I remember Mom saying to us, okay, so now we because people at Crown Court Seal really liked my dad. He was on the executive insurance plan. And so, and he always would tell my mother, you guys will be better off when I'm gone. Because, you had insurance on the houses, so the mortgages were paid off. He had life insurance that was beyond the normal life insurance. And anyway, and so we went from, being, eating from the Salvation Army, meals to really having spare money. Not that mom, every penny still was mattered to her a lot. But I remember her saying, we can go move someplace else because this is tough to be here because it's the Gums service station, and live tight, or we can stay here and live maybe a little more financial freedom. And I remember all us kids say, "Oh, we want to stay right here, right? We want to stay, where our memory is." And we came home one day, and she had bought a house on the auction block up at Poorhouse Road. So we moved up there, and that's where we, lived the rest of our childhood there. And so she's coming from that house to pick me up at Boy Scouts, and she gets, almost to the stop sign, and she sees these tennis shoes in the road. And so another thing you might not know is when you get hit by a car, it picks you right about your shoes. And so my shoes are right there where the car picked me up. And she sees the shoes, and she immediately knows they're my shoes. And she jumps out of the car, and my sister Susan is with her, who is a little over a year older than me. Will tell the story how she had to throw the car up and park. Wow. And then a friend of mine who was right there, and it happened to be right there on the scene. He told me later, said, your mother just dropped to her knees. And she said, God, you took one, don't take another.
I can
So,
imagine.
yeah. So imagine, and you don't have, you don't, it's not like, I think, there's probably things that were better back then, things that are better today, but certainly the support systems weren't there. So she was definitely went into, survival mode and making sure her, she had 4 kids to raise and anyway.
Sponsored by White House Foods, serving generations of consumers since 1908.
Hi guys, Brittany here. Thank you so much for listening to part 1 of our interview with my dad. We can't wait to see you back here next week for part 2. Have a great week and we will chat soon.